Thank you guys all. You've been a great audience, and I do realize we're the last panel between you guys and the happy hour, so I want to be as sensitive to that as possible. So today's session is called Going Beyond the Fundamentals of Growth Marketing, and really kind of want to treat it as a retrospective on everyone's business in terms of what they deem as the fundamentals of growth marketing, but also looking ahead and understanding from a perspective of transformation, what does the future look like, and how do your organizations tackle certain things like scalable insights, automation, experimentation, a lot of the common themes that we've heard throughout today's sessions. So before we jump into that, I'd love to do just a quick round of introductions across the board. As John mentioned, I'm the VP of Customer Strategy over at Singular. So we'll start with you.
Hi everyone, my name is Sherry. I lead the Growth Media Technology team at Lyft.
Hello, so my name is David Mausolf. I'm a VP of UA at FOXNEXT Games, 20th Century Fox.
I'm Jayne Pimentel. I'm the Senior Director of Growth Marketing at DraftKings.
Hey, Tapio, Tuomola. I'm leading UA team at Rovio.
Awesome, thank you. So, today's sessions, we discussed a bunch of different technologies, marketing stacks, automation, all this cool stuff, but I really kind of wanted to baseline against the idea of fundamentals. Looking across the diverse range of folks in the audience and making sure that, to a certain degree, we're kind of talking the same language and aligned of like, okay, what are the actual basics that should be in place before we actually talk about like what Dave said about automating the heck out of everything, right? So, guess to just kick it off, I'd love for you guys to provide some perspective, not only from a technology perspective, but people, process, as well as technology. Dave, do you want to kick that one off?
Yeah, sure, I'll kick it off. So I'm actually pretty excited about this because one of my favorite people who I've known now since 2011 now at this point, Sherry, who worked with at Hotwire, and then there's Lyft, and now I'm at FOXNEXT, and I'll get her at FOXNEXT one of these days. Each of those instances, going at Hotwire and Lyft, and then now at FOXNEXT Games, you kind of learn what works and also what's importantly doesn't work. And I think one of the big insights I had is a lot of times when we talk in these meetings like this about what we need to be working on, we really do miss the fundamental piece, which is we talk about automation, but there's all the kind of building blocks to kind of get up to that. And actually one thing that my CTO and I were doing actually even a couple of weeks ago was actually drawing out what the pyramid looks like. And I think really the baseline of everything that you need to kind of focus on first is, do you actually have your data structured in a clean, standardized format in your database? So is your joins done properly? Is your data being logged in a correct fashion? So before you even talk about having dashboards or you're building UI tools, whether it's Retool or you're building something internally, that's, I think, the most fundamental piece that I see, honestly, 90% of the companies dealing with. We dealt with that at Expedia, we dealt with that at Lyft. And I think one of the insights from FOXNEXT that we had the benefit of doing is we had no tech debt, so we could basically structure everything from the start really cleanly. And what that actually allowed us to do is go to the next step, which is actually having...
It's like a hierarchy of needs.
It's a hierarchy of needs, yeah. So it's like Maslow's hierarchies of needs. So the next step about that is then you can actually have a centralized database that then links to your dashboard. So then having a unified dashboard so that everyone is looking at the same dashboard. And what I say by everyone is, I mean, your CFO, your operations person, your marketing person are all looking at the same Tableau, Looker, Periscope dashboard that's pulling from the same data source. You don't have your CFO looking at a Google Sheet or Excel spreadsheet, someone else looking at a Facebook UI, and someone else looking at a Tableau dashboard. Because what happens in that situation is you have a lot of stakeholder misalignment in that situation around what data to actually trust. So you get the data structured in the right way, you have the dashboard, then you can actually start building tools and recommendations on all these advanced things that we kind of talked about. But those first two things there, honestly, a lot of that stuff takes 6 to 12 months to actually get structured in the right format and to do it properly. So before you even start working on the automation and the tool sets, you kind of need to get those things done. So that's how I kind of see it from that fashion. And kind of the reason why I think that's all important is if you structure in that way, you don't need to hire a 30 or 40 person marketing manager or marketing team. You can have a much more narrow team and then have a few data engineers that can actually get the data digested in the right format. So It's one point of view. Maybe other people have different
I
point
was
of
going
views.
to say, do you guys agree, disagree? I mean,
I have to second the whole data cleanliness thing. As the operations person on the Lyft Growth Media team, I spend a lot of time making sure that the data, that the inputs, right, are actually clean. If it's not clean, then it's garbage in, garbage out. Even if you have the best ML model or if you have the best attribution model, it's going to be wrong. So what we spend a lot of time on is on the accuracy of the data and on the timeliness of the data and also the granularity of the data. So by accuracy, it means that it's not just you validate once and done. You have to have a way to validate it constantly, and then when there's a data issue that happens, which it will, it always will, there's a way to detect it and then to recover from it pretty quickly. And then on the timeliness piece, it really depends on how often you're tweaking your levers. If you're tweaking your levers every day, you want yesterday's data today, so you can make that decision. But if you're doing it every week, maybe every week it's okay. And then finally, the granularity of it. If your levers are at the campaign level, you obviously need campaign level data. If it's at the creative level, you need creative level data. So once you actually have those fundamentals, then you can build all the cool shit on top of it.
what about from your perspective, Jayne? I mean,
So I don't want to echo everything, so I'll say data, yes, check the box. I will counter that the dashboard piece.
Yeah.
Not as important now that I've had kind of scars from trying to do dashboards for people like Machine Zone, where you have 100 media buyers and everyone wants to stay in Excel because it's like their baby and they think that like you get paid to just be in Excel all day. Sorry. So I will say that that's a fool's errand to really try to create and repeat what a typical media buyer would view in a dashboard, because every media buyer, different granularity, every channel, kind of passes different granularity and different cuts of data. And so it's the one source of truth at the highest level where you just want to report back to an executive. And outside of that, I basically put on every other marketer, like, it's up to you guys to put whatever view you want, but you own that decision around how you optimize. And if your data's messed up because you
so you have like a high level of accountability on the team. I'm saying, hey, so it's on you.
Every marketer on my team is like their own CEO. They can make whatever business decisions they want. I don't challenge it until like they basically make repeated mistakes off of something that they should have been corrected. But I don't think I'm that militant about it. Outside of like, I'm not going to fix your own views for you. You got to do that yourself.
That's interesting. I guess, Tapio, like, what are your thoughts on that? Because from my understanding, at Rovio, there's some just key decision frameworks that the team oftentimes would rely on. I mean, how do you guys think about that, especially with a franchise and portfolio that you try to maintain consistently?
Yeah, well, first of all, I need to echo that data, that's pretty much the all fundamentals.
Yeah.
If it's not there, we can't do anything, or we don't know what we are doing. But yeah, we have also a quite independent way of working in a UA manager, so they can make their decisions themselves. But we have also a pretty good framework and understanding that, well, we have quite many similar type of games. So we also know that what kind of stuff is working for one game, and we can replicate that pretty well for another game. So in that sense, we have frameworks, even though that we try to work as independently as possible.
Makes sense. So you guys all pretty much commented on the data perspective, more or less, as well as the marketing perspective. I just want to make sure we juxtapose and look at the people's perspective. And as teams grow, evolve, like, what are the base requirements when scaling out a marketing organization? Like, Cher, you're coming from an operations perspective. Is that like a norm? Is that, when does that occur? From a BI and engineering perspective, like, what are you guys' thoughts there? Of, like, what is the fundamentals in that perspective?
I mean, my perspective is a lot of times a role like mine in an organization where, one of my key KPIs is having clean data. This is a luxury that not a lot of companies have. So a lot of times it's a very tech savvy, a very data savvy marketer who takes on that role, and that's okay. I think at the end of the day, if you have the right support system to be able to validate your data and make sure that it's clean, that your inputs are sound, I don't think it really matters who does that.
Who does it? It could be the marketer at the end of the day saying, it needs to look like this, make sure it's like that.
Yeah, and for my perspective, I don't want to manage like 100 people, right?
Yeah.
And so we try to automate as much as possible. I would say that when I look even for marketers to join my team, it's interesting because in our industry, if you consider yourself a media buyer, you think you're a really good analyst. And if you consider yourself an analyst, you think you're a really good media buyer, and a really good growth marketer thinks they're terrible at both. So because they kind of want to continue to perpetuate their craft and get better at that. But it's a hard balance to figure out how many people to hire. I actually don't see much relationship between how much you spend, because a marketer can manage easily $10,000 and $1 million. That really, it's more the complexity around the questions that your organization has, and the we'll probably get into it, but experimentation, there's a lot of things that go into it that I think is more directly tied to how you manage your headcount rather than just how much you're spending.
I think it's actually a really great point, which is, what is the person doing? And I think if you go back 4 or 5 years ago, I think people, if you looked at a pie chart, were spending a lot of time setting the bids, creating really granular campaigns, targeting specific segments. And I think, I'm actually very thankful that there's tools like UAC and Facebook, which if you do them properly, you can save a lot of time and make campaigns more simple. But what that frees up is it kind of shrinks that percentage of time from a pie graph. So what does that free up? It means that they're spending more time doing experiments and actually putting together what is the approach to this test design, how do you want to set up, how do you want to run it, what are the results of it? And then it becomes a question of how many things can you actually test and actually build out, and what's the impact of those tests as well too. And if they're high impact and they're doing consistently well, that might mean that it makes sense to have another headcount there. Now, if the list of things that you want to test and run isn't that high, maybe it doesn't justify to have another headcount. But I think, to your point, someone just doing bid and budget changes and changing statuses, that shouldn't necessarily be a justification for getting another headcount. And truthfully, that's not actually that great for someone's career development. So I think it's actually in our interest as leaders to hire people who are developing critical thinking skills, not developing skills to know how to use the Facebook UI or the Google UI. I don't think that's value add. I think that's a good trade-off for the people that we're bringing onto our teams.
Makes perfect sense. Do you guys have anything else to add? I was going to jump.
Yeah, actually, one thing that I think usually gets lost, especially when scaling the team, that documentation is quite valuable, and usually it's kind of, you can't do it too much, or if you do too much, then it's a waste of time. But it definitely will help when there's new joiners for the company, and there's some way that you can go back and look at what you are doing and what you're supposed to be doing. So.
Can you elaborate a little more on that in terms of the types of documentation? Are we talking about best practices when doing X, Y, Z? Talking about, I guess, what type of documentation as it pertains to growth marketing or even outside of it? Yeah.
The more the better.
Yeah.
But definitely, best practices are one that we found valuable. But then also everything that we have been testing, analyzing already beforehand or earlier, that we need to have some way that when there's new people joining, that he or she can go and look back that, okay, what you have been doing, and try to make sure that you don't make the same mistakes as we've had.
Like a post-mortem and making sure that it's well documented, so you can learn from mistakes, of course. Great. So common thread being really kind of, it doesn't sound like 100% aligned, but common thread being really empowered people working on the teams, as well as data, whether it's dashboarded in a consistent way or not. So, again, looking ahead around this whole idea of, beyond the fundamentals, let's talk about the idea of scalable insights. I had mentioned scalable insights, experimentation, automation. We can kind of touch upon all of them, but really want to kick it off around scalable insights from the perspective of, let's say, in Rovio's world, launching a new title under the same franchise. Like, how do you make sure that you can actually learn on a continual basis outside of maybe manual documentation? Like, what is that next level? For DraftKings, understand the world around you in terms of sports. How do you actually make it a repeatable process? Because it's kind of a never-ending thing, and sports are always just moving, and so on and so forth. Geos, perhaps for Lyft, would be interesting. So I guess we'll just kick it off with you, Tapio.
Like I said already, that we have quite many similar type of games, puzzle games for the more or less same audience. So it helps that when we are launching a new game, we have pretty much good understanding already about the insights or learnings from the previous one, and which will also apply for the new one. So that's one really valuable that we are really using. But of course, when we are having new type of games, more mid-core, then it's not so easy anymore.
Yeah, I would imagine though, when targeting a similar audience, you'd probably be faced with some needs to get insights around cannibalization. right? Because, I mean, is that something that you guys have focused on or tried to fine tune over at Rovio?
Yeah, I think it's hot topic always. It's always discussion that, okay, what is the cannibalization? Should we have more similar type of games for the same audience or no? But to be honest, we haven't yet found really what's the key there. We are testing that and finding out all the time. But
Makes sense.
I mean, for DraftKings, when I joined, we had one product. We now have 3.
Yeah.
I would echo some of what Chris from Glue said, I think earlier, and even from the Rovio side of, there's not a ton of cannibalization that we see because daily fantasy sports, sportsbook, and casino have very different audiences.
Yep.
So to us, that's not kind of a question that we have to really experiment on outside of a lot of it's connecting the data, the dots on that, because they're very different types of games, apps. And then, from the scaling side, and I have a few team members here on my team who probably had a dartboard, who probably hated me NFL season this past year. We're going to be a lot better this year in terms of not having you guys spend so much time in the office, but it put us in the position of, I joined, and then I made the really great decision of we're going to cut all of our agencies, and you guys are going to get no help, and so you have to do all this all yourself, and it's the largest season of our, of our year. And it really put a lot of fire under our team to figure out how do we go from 1 to 3 products without scaling headcount. We didn't hire anyone during that time period. Sportsbook is now the large part of our revenue. And we're still in the same almost position from a team perspective, but we've gotten a lot more efficient. Our platform team has been delivering a ton more tools for us, and I think that that hopefully kind of the rebirth out of the fire has made us realize really what's necessary and what is just wasted time to even go down the rabbit hole.
Well, what kind of tools, if you could just share more about
I guess I can go less vague. We can get deeper on that.
Yeah.
So first thing would be campaign management. I think we already talked about that. Check. Creative and IDing and tagging. And when I see even tools, a lot of that can be human-based too. I don't want my team cataloging and tagging the own creatives. Tom Brady is in this ad, ID number 1, 2, 3, background, black, XY7. I don't want them doing that. I think of it I'm a mom of 2 now, and I optimize my life. When I get home, there's dinner that's being delivered, someone makes my bed, I basically think about, I want to spend the least amount of time doing the things that I have to maintain for my life, and want to spend the most amount of time with my kids, and I want to spend the most amount of time with my team, and have them the least amount of time doing all the tedious work. So I would 100% automate whatever they do on a daily basis, that they just, you have to make your bed every day. Well, you don't have to make it, someone else can make it. I would rather pay someone else to do it.
Yeah, I mean, soon your kids will be making dinner for you, and that's super optimized, right?
Okay. Not child labor, but there's Postmates out there. There's a reason that all these things Lyft. Someone can drive me to work. So
I was going to ask, do you have a machine that's making a bed for you and making dinner for you? Because I want one of those.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I was actually talking to someone about the image tagging, for example, and one potential solution we're looking at is there's things like Mechanical Turk, for example, that you could literally just create a simple UI and just have the images, and they just basically ask them a question like, what Marvel characters are in these images?
Oh, interesting.
And just just watch the video, tag it, put it in, and save it, and update it like that. And that'd be a great way and a great cost per tag, I guess, if you want to do a metric like that, to kind of do that versus having a $120,000 a year media buyer be doing manual tagging. So I think the way I kind of think about Scalable Insights, it's a lot of it actually goes back to cross-functional relationships. So what I would say is fundamentally, I think the team, Vivek, Herman, everyone who kind of works in the media buying team has a lot of fundamentals down about what to do when performance goes down, what to look at in terms of diagnostics. That's all good, fundamental. So the next step is how can we develop stronger relationships with our product teams and our consumer insights team and our product marketing team to better understand our customers, to drive a better understanding about how we design the game, how we design our advertisements, or how we target people. And so a great example of that is we have a Storyscapes game, which is currently in beta right now. And so there's different IP in it. So things like Titanic, X-Files, Aliens, yada, yada, yada. And each one of those things are going to resonate to a different audience. And so a lot of what we do is do research on this IP, get results from things like Facebook Insights, but then we also combine that with the consumer insights data to understand who is those consumers, why do they like this specific IP, and so then we can figure out if a user's coming in from Titanic, for example, maybe they see a different experience versus someone who's coming in from an X-Files ad, and actually tailor that. And so that's a really strong cross-functional relationship where you have a consumer insights person, someone on the product team, or game development team in this situation, and someone on the UA team working together to actually sync and share those insights. I think it's really important that as UA people, we're not just like holding our knowledge together. It's actually really important to share with those other teams to improve the product.
Awesome. I guess from Lyft's perspective, maybe enter new markets, like what are like forecasting? I mean, what's that world look like in terms of making sure you can try to make it more turnkey when exploring new opportunities,
Yeah, so one of the ways that we're scaling our marketing team is that we want our marketers to be focusing on finding new incremental levers to drive our business. I mean, that really is the only way as we get big to continue growing at the rate that we've been growing. We can't continue just doing the things that we've been doing. So in order to free up their time to continue to experiment and find these new incremental levers, we try to automate the campaign management of what we consider business as usual. This is the stuff, the campaigns and the tactics that we know has worked in the past. It reaches our ROI and it reaches our scale. Let's let an algorithm run that. So Lyft's business is really complex. We have two sides of the marketplace, just like Airbnb. We have the drivers and the passengers, and then for each of the hundreds of regions we have a very unique balance of supply and demand. And then there's multiple channels that we can actually, tweak. So an algorithm is really best suited to take these inputs and recommend what is the right media mix for a particular region based on the need and based on a target cost per conversion. So once we can actually automate that and let it run on its own, the marketers really focus on experimentation. Like, what are the new channels? What are the new campaigns? Is it a creative optimization? Is it a new incentive? Are these things driving incremental bookings? And if they are, let's productize it, add it back into the algorithm, and then repeat.
Perfect. That's like the perfect segue for me as well. So moving into the world of experimentation, kind of want to understand, again, from channels you guys are testing, but more so how you think about experimentation at your respective organizations. Like, what's the percentage that's right in terms of how much time I should allocate? Is it a separate team that focuses on specifically? I guess, how have you guys or your organizations really thought of that in terms of identifying new opportunities and making the appropriate investments to that effort?
So I think the best orgs that actually do experimentation are people like Netflix that multi-product or titles or whatever they're doing, and countries. They built a whole platform around that, which is well documented on Medium. For us, it's less tests, but for longer, because the problem with experimentation is it's really not an A or B. It's like you end up crafting a whole new hypothesis after you've run the initial experimentation, and the longer you can perpetuate an experiment and maybe resolve something that you weren't actually seeking in the first place, you end up getting to a place that is at a heightened level. Instead of saying, does this creative work or does this creative work, it's actually not that. That's not the question. It's why is there an anomaly here that I didn't really pick up on? And to get that, you have to get the granular data, because maybe it was that there was a particular player headshot, or maybe it was a UI, or maybe it was such a crappy looking creative that people are clicking on it because they're like, why the hell would DraftKings be promoting this right now? And then you realize, oh, okay, well, that was just because, the creative looked bad, or actually not that the creative looked bad, but we want to stylize it better because something about this looking like it's clickable or something like that is something we want to try testing. Experimenting new channels, I would say the thing about that is it ends up becoming a fraud issue in terms of like the more networks that you add on, the incrementality and time to manage those, and the incrementality, like if you're covering 90% of uniques, adding 10 more ad networks is probably not going to get you any different of results, and in fact actually impact your data, impact the time that your team is managing things, and be more of a time suck than just focusing on like top coverage and then really going deep into experimentation and kind of honing in on your own business questions and challenges that you're having.
When working with the teams, do you carve out and say X% is going to be against experimentation? I guess how do you manage that, like from a, again, organizational perspective?
I mean, for us, our goal is to automate anything we can so that the marketers can spend as much time as possible finding new levers.
I think there's this like 80-20 rule that I hear sometimes. By the way, I don't agree with this. I actually think a better way to frame it is actually what's the minimum sample size you need to actually make a good
from a
decision
measurement perspective.
from a measurement standpoint. I think a lot of people in this room are very familiar with measuring statistical significance between two populations. So if there's a 1% difference versus a 20% difference between the populations.
Tell us more.
So if you need 1%, if you have a 1% difference between two populations, you're going to need a much larger sample size to actually measure that statistically. If you have a 20% difference between those populations, you're going to need much less sample size. So going back to what is the job of the marketers? Part of the job of the marketers is actually to figure out what is the minimum difference in performance we actually need, so the minimum threshold to detect, and then given your success event, whether that's some type of revenue goal or first walk or first ride or whatever, first ride, coming back, whatever that is, and given the conversion rate all the way up to impression or whatever, or referral, how many events do you actually need to do that? And then what is the cost for the highest part of the funnel? And then you can start to build a kind of initial cost for that test. And then you can do that for all your tests, right? And then you have a stacked rank list of what's the minimum detection between these two things, what's the impact, and what's the spend associated to that. And so what should you actually prioritize from a framework standpoint? And so then it just becomes a question of what do you prioritize within that list, and what's the best usage from a spending standpoint?
Yeah, and well, we don't have either any specific time that you should put on experimentation, but we have quite much, try to build culture that we value experimentation over all other stuff. So for example, our team motto is that be the best at getting better. And we know that experimentation, trying new channels, trying different kind of channels, TV, Spotify, podcasts, those takes time. It's not easy. And actually it's pretty much challenging the way that you have been working, and will that makes any sense. So in that sense, we try to make, we work in a way that we value those, that there are someone always testing, and we are following up that are we really challenging our current ways of working, instead of following that are we putting enough time on those, but looking that are we getting any insights, how many times per week or month we are really looking that is the current way really the best way.
Yeah, it's like a necessary risk, and it's also a measured risk on to what extent are you going to be experimenting. Makes sense.
I actually think that, if you think that experimentation is really critical to your work, it needs to be a KPI for the team. Either it's the number of experiments or the number of new levers that you find that's scalable. If it's important enough, you need to build it into the team's KPI.
Awesome. So, throughout this conversation, as well as other panels, automation came up a bunch of times, and love for you guys to just provide high-level examples or even more detailed examples of where you've essentially decided to automate a workflow or a process at your respective organizations. And then we'll go into kind of the decision criteria of how to automate, what to automate, when to automate, things of that sort. Or we can tackle it all at once. Leave it to you guys.
I think Sherry made a great point at the start, which is what is the frequency of the decisions being made? So example would be new campaign creation. For our team, we don't create new campaigns a lot of times, that we kind of let them run for very long amounts of time. So trying to automate like something like that, where it's very infrequent, the percentage of time saving is very small. But something like changing a bid or budget for something like Google, let's say, it's a very repetitive decision. And on the surface, it seems easy, right? If your performance is bad, you decrease the bid. If it's good, you increase it. But then there's all the nuances that kind of go into it. So are you hitting the certain event ratio? Do you have enough minimum events going to the system? Or the events happening at a certain latency? There's a whole list of a 5-page list of all the stuff on this. And so if you're a media buyer, you don't want to go through a 20 or 30 checklists just to make a decision if the bid needs to get changed or the budget needs to get changed. And so the beauty of that is it's well documented, it's repetitive, And so you can build logic that's very easy to understand and write, and update, most importantly, for the media buyers. And so I think that's where we spend a lot of time doing, is repetitive, high percentage of time, and then easily, and then also complex in terms of like the number of inputs or criteria you need to look at.
Yeah, I would say repetitive, right? Bit changes, like easy, like if this, then do this. You can get super sophisticated, but don't go there yet. Like if you're first starting out, rule-based automation, great. Budget allocation, great. Delivery of creatives even, like everyone probably emails, or not everyone, there's still a world where you email creatives to publishers. Maybe you have some sort of UI that publishers can pull down creatives based upon like current, creative success or whatever. The less amount of time that your team spends speaking to people outside of your house, like partners and things like that, as much as they love them, they take them out to nice dinners and things. The automation part is start small, and like don't beat yourself up. Like if it's like you're not going to get like some grandiose, you're not going to like save the world. And if you just start and like, I deliver this massive platform and it does everything that the media buyer wants, probably first your product team is going to be really upset when your marketer says this actually takes more time to do than I used to do before. So start small, and look at what the marketers are doing on a daily basis, and use those as easy wins to create a product roadmap to automate, and then measure against that. So give your marketers time to get used to the tool, make sure they understand how to use it, and give feedback too. Like don't use V1. It's like V10 might be your benchmark for how efficient, if your efficiency gained on doing it manually versus doing it automated. Don't use like V1 and saying like, this doesn't work, so we're gonna scrap this, and everyone goes back to doing everything yourself. Start with maybe one API too. So if you're doing a campaign creation tool, start with like an easy API, Facebook or something that you're using constantly, and use that as like your kind of template, and then kind of add on new inventory sources from there. So those are some quick ones, hopefully less big than last time.
I think you said a really good point, which is basically rules-based logic is not something to be scared of. And I think as an industry, one of the things I notice is there's a temptation to say things like AI or algorithms. And the reality is most of us are using decision trees or very simple logic. And just because you're not using a Bayesian model or some type of fancy model type, it probably actually solves 80 to 90% of your use cases. And so I think like as an industry, we need to be more comfortable just being open about the fact that doing simple is actually a lot of times better than doing an advanced model.
Because over at Rovio, are you guys automating the bid and campaign management as well? And I guess maybe there's another form of automation that you guys have explored, whether it's internal tool sets, kind of and informing player journeys, customer journeys.
Yeah, well, we at the moment also building internal bidding tool, and we have been trying to do that and looking also at the partners there now about 2-3 years. But we have also found out that it's not always as simple. You first need to have the foundation there. And well, pretty much that's what are you doing there? What is your LTV tool there, and forecasting that? If you don't have that in a place, then pretty much all the automation that you are doing based on the rules that you think that are the best ones, it might be that you are not optimizing the end goal. So I would say that when you are starting to automatize campaigns, spend some time at first and think that what really makes sense, what you are trying to achieve, and is the current way of working really the best way, and especially the rules challenge them.
Awesome. Something that you mentioned, David, before was really around professional development and people you hire, and like if they're spending time doing all these activities, they're not really growing or developing. So to that extent, I just wanted to see if you guys had any points to elaborate upon what you wouldn't automate ever, or maybe those things would change over time.
Yeah, I think this got mentioned, I think, earlier, but I think actual creative strategy is something that I think works really well. I mean, there's tools out there that will go create different color combinations or text combinations, which I think has value to extend creative fatigue, but the actual hard work of doing the planning around what do we test, how do we test it, what's the right things to be focusing on from a roadmap standpoint, that requires critical thinking skills, just like also the experimentation design. So actually thinking about how do we, for example, do a retargeting test? How do we actually measure the incrementality correctly? How do we actually make sure that we run this test long enough see if the test control actually stay and maintain a positive lift over a long enough time period maintains. All those questions and those critical thinking skills are really hard to do, and that's why you're getting paid $100,000 plus salary to do that. I mean, for example, you're not getting paid to be in Excel every day. You're getting paid to have that critical thinking skills and really put together a well thought out experiment and test. And so I think that's really where the focus is. I think what's also good too is when you talk to candidates about that and you position that as an expectation, that sets a benchmark, a very high benchmark about what they need to be doing and striving to, and you can hold them accountable. Versus if the benchmark is you need to be changing bids and budgets every day, and that's how we're defining success, well, A, that's not very rewarding for your superstar players, and B, you're not going to retain them very long, which is, I think, why you see a lot of title inflation in the industry, because people get bored, and they're like, well, I'm now ready for a senior manager, I'm ready for a director, I'm ready for this, right? And so you have someone who has 2 years experience with a director title. And so it's much better to have someone who's really challenged, learning, and can go really deep, than to have someone who, you know, knows how to do bids and budget changes.
Yep.
So it's a little controversial, but yeah.
I mean, I think that's basically true. You aren't hiring people to be in spreadsheets all day. So I think I've mentioned before is we automate as much as we can so that we can leave the marketers to do what, you know, people do best, which is coming up with new ideas. A machine cannot tell you, hey, try this lever or try this creative variation. Those inputs really have to come from people and experience and coming up with a hypothesis, and then you test, and then if it does scale and achieve the ROI you're looking after, then you automate. So I think coming up with these new levers is definitely something that we want to leave to the humans and not to the machines.
So let's pretend for a moment that, you know, we're in the future and, you know, bid management, things are automated, people are experimenting 80% of their time. I guess, what's next then? I mean, this is more kind of just like, yeah, visionary stuff. Jayne.
Sure. Visionary. So I don't, first of all, I don't consider myself visionary. I bet on the, make big swings and usually swing and with a miss. Like Le'Veon Bell was my first pick last season, and I work at DraftKings. So clearly missed the mark on a lot of things. I would say what I look at from a development perspective with the automation is maybe some of the issues that we see in the market around people leaving teams quickly, around your rock stars and your superstars, in terms of your rock stars being people that will be on your team for many years, superstars that you'll only get for maybe a year or two, and they move on. Something that was mentioned earlier today was this idea around like a chief growth officer. We will never be able to cultivate a rising star to be a chief growth officer if they are stuck on the same channel and you tell them to do this one job for 4 years straight. Because if you tell someone on team, you are buying paid social or you are buying Google, and you've been doing that for four, 6, whatever years, they're going to have no idea what to do when they have to then manage an offline team, an engineering team, a product team. Like I started in desktop, and you know, you just gotta figure this shit out, like eventually. But you also have to understand that, like, maybe some of the people that are in the room that feel like they're stuck, like automate some of the stuff yourself. Like that's what I started to do when I was a lowly, you know, trafficker or whatever on the desktop side. And because I wanted to get in the mix of other things or want to spend my time doing other things, even if I didn't feel supported doing that. And I kind of look back on that as like, now that I manage a team, I want them to go to other channels and actually not even think about channels as channels. We have business problems to solve, and it doesn't really matter if you can deploy it across multiple channels. And I think that you will see this market that, like, a lot of companies that have adopted automation will stop hiring channel-specific buyers, and even the idea of a buyer will go away, because that's not a career.
That is a really good point. Great marketers are full stack. They can work in any channel as long as you achieve the results that you want. So I think when people talk about UA, they're mostly thinking digital. You know, who knows? Maybe out of home or direct mail or TV, radio. These could be really good UA and ROI positive UA channels. We just haven't discovered how to make it work yet and how to measure it correctly. So those are the areas where I think any marketer could focus their brains on, as opposed to trying to optimize repeatedly the same channels.
I think one thing that's going to be happening more, and I've started to see it happening a little bit, is when you look at Silicon Valley, look at the tech industry, there's something that we haven't really borrowed from other industries, like in the Midwest and more traditional industries, which is rotational programs. And so when you think about rotational programs, what that means is you're getting people exposed not just to the UA side, but also getting them exposed to product management, getting them exposed to data engineering, things like that. And so I think it's actually really critical if we talk about when I do chief growth officers, that they understand how ETLs work, they understand how databases are built, they understand how front-end teams work and actually build UIs, they understand how a PRD is written, how the user stories are written, how you actually determine like what things actually get ranked, and then also understand the UA side as well too. And the person that actually understands all those pieces is going to have a significant advantage over someone who's just focused on one of those, because they can talk to each one of those people on the team and be a much more effective leader about pulling them together and putting together a more cohesive strategy around how do you grow the business.
Perfect. Awesome.
Go
ahead. No, go ahead.
One thing about being a full stack marketer too is we've been focusing on UA, but then at some point you also have to focus on engagement, and that's another channel to grow your business. So a full stack marketer has to know when to use the acquisition lever versus the engagement lever. So.
Definitely. Growth being, forever.
You're growing the business.
Growing the business.
Yeah.
Many ways. Awesome. I'm getting the red blinking light of death. So just wanted to actually open it up to the audience if you guys had any questions. Just one question. Anybody? If not, a big round of applause for the panel, and we'll leave it at that.